So, what I want to talk about today is satisfaction score, NPS, sentiment, and emotion, and some of the power and the limitations of each. So to begin, I want to first take us to a museum. And artists have motivations behind their paintings. They have reasons why they paint certain things. People who go to museums, art gurus have reasons they go to museums to see beautiful art. If I ask you the question, how many here think this is a good picture? Raise your hand. Anyone? If you think this is a bad picture, please raise your hand. If you have no opinion at all about this picture or we're just avoiding the question, please raise your hand. Okay. So obviously what I've just done is extracted an NPS score from you. It's a satisfaction, yes, no, and it's scored on a Likert scale. So 9s and 10s are promoters, evangelizers, 7s and 8s are passives. They're not having any kind of fantastic experience or bad experience. They're just not talking about it. Detractors are out talking smack about you all over the place. What we want to do is try and produce promoters. The weakness with the NPS, now it's a powerful tool. It's been used a lot, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback from it. But it has limitations. The limitation is that it cannot answer the question why someone is a promoter, why they're passive, or why they're a detractor. For that, we need some deeper analysis. So if I go back to my picture, and I now change the question slightly, and I say, now tell me why you're a promoter, or why you rated yourself 10 or 9, or tell me why you're passive, or why you're a detractor, and then I give you some means of being able to talk to me, this opens up an incredible amount of really, really rich data. And unless I'm able to analyze that data and really understand what people are saying, I won't be able to produce the kinds of experiences that they want, the kinds of experiences that lead to loyalty. So let me give you an example. So B. Smith is a 22-year-old college student. She's recently gone to a fake website called acme.com and purchased a fake product called the X4 ultra-thin laptop. And in a survey, she's told me way down here in very small letters that she's a 9. She's a promoter. And then I gave her a means of talking to me. This is your open-end question. And she's told me. She's given me tons of really, really rich information. Emotive, sentimental, all kinds of stuff in here. This is the kind of thing we need to get to. Don't worry about reading it. We're going to dissect it a little bit here as I go along. This is where she's telling me exactly what's going on in her mind. So I need to be able to have a means that understands this. That's where natural language processing and sentiment analysis come in. So in order to get to sentiment, I have to have some way of analyzing the data. With the amounts of data that come in, now let me say first before I get to that the open-end survey question is great, it's fantastic, but it's not the only means. There's social media. The amount of data that's being produced today is in the billions and billions of records. There's tons of data out there to sift through to find the pieces of feedback that are going to help me improve the customer experience of my customers. So that's where the NLP comes in. Humans are not going to sit down and read it. We need computers that don't need breaks, don't need sleep, don't need food, to process through it constantly, 24/7, 365. But computers don't know how to do this. Humans are incredibly complicated, totally very complex. So we need to be able to teach a computer to be able to do it. So at Clarabridge, we have an NLP engine that helps us do this. The NLP gets us to sentiment. Let me give you an example of how we do it first. So here's a sentence. Every feedback record that comes in, we break it into the words. And each of the words has a part of speech. And already, this is a non-trivial task. Words have ambiguity. There could be multiple parts of speech on a particular word, so I've got to figure that out. Next, I use shallow parsing and full syntax parsing to figure out where my clause boundaries are. I'm getting a little technical, but this is how I get the rich data out. When I understand where the clause boundaries are, I know how to limit sentiment and its reach, and I can zero in on sentiment, pieces of sentiment in the text. On a full syntax parse, I can traverse that and figure out what the linguistic relationships are in the sentence. So if I don't have NLP, I won't know, for example, that the customer service is not good, and I also won't know that good has now changed to negative because it's not good, and that the quality is really high. I might think that the customer service is really high and the quality is not good. The NLP gets me there. It helps me to make those links and be able to analyze the sentiment much more accurately. So this is what NLP gets us, and the NLP leads into the sentiment. So let's go back to this verbatim. First, with the natural language processing, I understand that the it in B. Smith's example here at the very top refers to the laptop. I also know that didn't is didn't, even though it doesn't have an apostrophe. So it's missing the apostrophe, but the NLP is smart enough to be able to detect that. Same thing with ridiculous. Misspelled, but I can correct for that. And crucially, I know that the shirt is yellow and not the minutes. So the NLP gives me that and makes those links. Now if I add sentiment on top of that, I understand that there are words in the sentence that have sentiment. Now the powerful thing with sentiment analysis is that it quantifies the sentiment experience. It places a quantification on top of the words. That quantification is very, very, very nice to have because I can then begin to calculate things. And when a computer can calculate things, it can then aggregate them to larger and larger pieces, which gets me to my topics. If I create a topic model, I can calculate the sentiment on a lower level, aggregate it up to higher levels, and start drilling down into topics and figuring out what people are saying and why certain topics are trending negative and trending positive and go along those lines. So a typical topic model in Clarabridge would look something like this. So I have my data, I know my domain, I've segmented it in a topic model like this, and now I'm ready to start analyzing the topics. The next slide is very busy, very hard to read. Let me help out here. This is a sentiment block report. These are all of my topics, and the sentiment is calculated and aggregated up to the topic level. If you look at the top, just to the right of center, there's a category called promotions, and it's gray, meaning it's neutral. I would expect my promotions, that's a red flag to me, because I would expect the promotions to be positive. If I'm giving somebody a discount, I would expect them to talk positively about that in their feedback. This one's neutral. So there's something wrong, and I need to dive into that. If you look at the bottom left, there's a category called problem resolution. I would expect that to be positive as well because I've resolved the problem, but it's still red. So I need to dive in there and figure out why it isn't changing from negative to positive. So that's sentiment. It's a quantification on top of a customer experience. The limitation there is that the quantification is an abstraction away from the reality that's happening inside of a human being. Customers are human beings, and they're having an experience inside, and that experience, they're trying to convey that experience to me in various ways. So the quantification is just a great way to calculate, but that's the limitation. So if I need to go, I want to go a level deeper. So the NPS got me a very high level view. The sentiment started to ask the question why people are promoters or detractors or passives. Now I want to go even deeper than the sentiment and figure out what the experience is that they're having on an emotional level. That's where emotion analysis comes in. So if I go back to my picture one last time, and I change the question slightly again to, now tell me how you feel about this picture. I can give them an open text box again, and if I'm an astute company, if I'm an astute listener, I will give them an open text box, but then I also will link that to social media and listen to what they're saying when they're not prompted. The unprompted feedback gives me even richer data looks at, each one of these levels looks at the data from a slightly different perspective, which gives me a more holistic view. So how do you feel about this picture? What I see here is a creepy guy who's just stone-faced and staring at me, and the lady to his right is kind of off in the distance, aloof, and don't know what's going on. This is American Gothic by Grant Wood, and maybe it's a good, maybe it's a bad picture. That all depends on you, but the point is you're telling me why. So you're also having an emotional experience. Some of the point to why the artist produces the art is to cause an emotional experience to happen, to convey a message in an emotional way. So how in the world do I analyze the emotion of people talking to me in social data or in my survey response? Well, a simple approach that I take is to simply create a categorization model based on those emotions. So the assumption here is that I'm trusting the person talking to me, that they are going to tell me exactly how they're feeling. You could argue that the words themselves are also an abstraction away from what's going on inside, but that's the best insight I have if I'm dealing with text. That's the best insight I have to what's going on inside of them. So I use the words, they're emotive words, to categorize and create a new categorization model that I can couple with my topic model to be able to produce more insight. So how would this look? If I put all three together, what I produced is a report that has all three of these elements. The blue dots are the NPS score. The columns are the volume of the emotion categories. Now the NPS score axis is on the right. The volume axis is on the left. And the sentiment is overlaid on top of those categories. Now, what I see in this report, love and happiness obviously trend toward positive. That's great. But there are other emotions that don't necessarily trend towards one's sentiment value. Anticipation, there's anticipation and surprise. Those are not necessarily positive or negative. One I'm seeing here that has good volume is confusion. It may trend negative, but it may not. It may trend more neutral generally, but it doesn't have a sentiment value necessarily. In this data, the NPS score for the confusion category is a 7.25, so these folks are passives. The sentiment value is negative. So this data happens to come from a consumer electronics retailer. So maybe they revamped one of their stores and everything is different and the signage is not great, so people are getting confused. And that's an easy problem to fix. I can dive into that category, figure out what the problem is, and solve it by changing the signage. But all three of these have come together to help give me different perspectives on customer experience. So we started out at the very high level NPS score. We used sentiment to quantify the human experience, which was an abstraction on top of what's really happening inside. And then we used emotion analysis to help get a deeper understanding of what's really going on. Now, a caveat on this is that who knows how many dimensions there are to human beings. I recently read that one human brain in one lifetime can produce upwards of 10 to the power of 70 trillion thoughts. Now, the number of atoms in the known universe is 10 to the 80. We could argue with that number all we want, but the fact is, human brain is incredibly powerful. Humans are complex. Computers have not caught up to them yet. But the more dimensions we can add to what we're trying to do, the better perspective we get on their experience, and that way we'll better understand them and be able to provide the experience that they're looking for. So thank you very much, and that's how you can contact me if you would like to.